"Sir, those girls live on my street," whispered the black girl of about 10, pointing directly at the 2 Italian marble tombstones that David Thompson had visited religiously every Saturday for exactly 18 months. The 45-year-old businessman felt the world spin. The child's words echoed like a gunshot in the silence of the premium Riverside cemetery, where he had invested a fortune to ensure that his twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, would have the eternal rest they deserved after the tragic accident that took their lives at the age of 7. "What did you say?" David asked hoarsely, dropping the bouquet of imported white lilies that had cost $800. His hand trembled not from surprise, but from something that had been growing inside him for weeks, the suspicion that something was terribly wrong with this whole story. The girl, visibly nervous but determined, repeated, "They live on Maple Street, sir. 2 little girls who look exactly alike, with curly blonde hair, always holding hands. The woman who takes care of them doesn't let them go out much, but I see them in the backyard sometimes." David Thompson had built an empire in real estate, starting from scratch to become one of the richest men in the country. He hadn't gotten where he was by being naive or ignoring suspicious details. And over the past 2 months, small signs had been accumulating like pieces of a macabre puzzle. First, there were the inconsistencies in the police reports that his private attorney had gained access to. Then the discovery that Victoria, his ex-wife, had moved inexplicable amounts of money shortly before the alleged accident. And more recently, the information that she was living in a modest house, far below the standard that the generous $15,000 monthly alimony would allow. "How do you know my daughters' names?" David asked, crouching down to the girl's height. His eyes, which for 18 months had expressed only pain, now shone with a dangerous intensity. "I heard the woman calling them Emma and Sophie yesterday when they were playing in the yard. That's why I came here today. My grandmother brought me to visit my grandfather." She pointed to a simple grave 3 rows back. "Then I saw you here, looking so sad, and I read the names on the stones. They're the same girls, sir. I'm sure of it." David closed his eyes for a moment, not out of despair, but out of a cold, calculating anger that had been fueled by months of discreet investigation. Victoria had completely underestimated his ability to uncover the truth. And if his suspicions were correct, his ex-wife had made the most costly mistake of her life. As the girl waited for his reaction, David felt something he hadn't experienced in 18 months, hope mixed with a thirst for justice that promised to be absolutely devastating. Because if his daughters were really alive, it meant that Victoria had not only stolen 18 months of his life as a father, but had also turned his existence into a hell of forged grief. There, in front of those tombstones that perhaps held only stones, David began to quietly plot the complete destruction of the woman who had dared to toy with a father's love for his daughters. If this story of betrayal and manipulation is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Victoria didn't know was that David Thompson had spent the last 2 months gathering evidence, and what he had discovered was about to turn her apparent victory into the total ruin of her life. 20 minutes later, David parked his black Porsche on Maple Street, a lower-middle-class residential street that contrasted sharply with the Millionaire neighborhood where Victoria had lived during their marriage. The girl, who had introduced herself as Destiny, walked ahead of him, pointing to a faded blue house at the end of the block. "It's there, sir. The house with the fenced yard." David's heart was beating steadily, not from nervousness, but from anticipation. Over the past 2 months, his team of private investigators had tracked Victoria's every financial move. Mysterious transfers to offshore accounts, payments to a corrupt police department official, even bribes to morgue employees. Everything was meticulously documented and recorded. When they arrived at the gate, David heard something that made his world stop, 2 children's voices shouting and laughing in the backyard. Voices he knew better than his own. Emma always had that high-pitched laugh when she was excited. Sophie spoke more softly, more shyly. "Mommy, look how I can jump rope," shouted one of the voices. David closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. 18 months of weekly visits to the cemetery. 18 months of paying $15,000 a month in alimony to a woman who was raising his own daughters with that money, while he believed they were dead. He rang the doorbell. Shuffling footsteps approached the door. Victoria opened it, and her expression changed from casual irritation to utter shock in a matter of seconds. She was still an attractive woman at 38, but now she looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that the alimony money was clearly not being used to treat. "David? What are you doing here?" "I've come for my daughters," he replied calmly, pushing the door open and entering without invitation. The house was simple but comfortable. And there, running out of the kitchen with cookies in their hands, were Emma and Sophie. Older, with longer hair, but undeniably his daughters. The girls stopped when they saw him, confused. They didn't recognize him immediately. After all, to them, Daddy had abandoned them over a year ago. "Girls, go to your room now," Victoria said quickly, her voice trembling. "No," David interjected, kneeling down. "Emma, Sophie, it's me. Daddy." Recognition slowly dawned in their little eyes. Emma was the first to run into his arms. Victoria watched in panic as David hugged the daughters she had been crying for 18 months. When she finally sent them to play in their room, she tried to regain control. "You can't just show up here, David. You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," he replied, taking his cell phone out of his pocket and pressing play on a recording. The voice of corrupt Officer Mike Harrison echoed through the room. "Yes, Mrs. Thompson, the false documents are perfect. No one will ever question the accident. Your daughters officially died on that highway." Victoria turned pale. David continued playing the recording. Now it was her voice. "What about the pension money? Will David continue to pay?" Harrison replied, "As far as we know, he'll be too busy crying to question anything." "You recorded our conversations," she whispered. "My team did much more than that," David smiled coldly. "We tracked every bank transfer, every suspicious payment, every forged document. You left a digital trail that a teenager could follow." Victoria tried one last attempt at manipulation. "David, you don't understand. I did it to protect the girls. There were dangerous people." "That's a lie," he interrupted. "You did it because you wanted the alimony money without the responsibilities of being a full-time mother. You wanted to start a new life, and your own daughters were inconvenient." She backed away, but arrogance still shone in her eyes. "Even if you prove something, you'll never be able to take them away from me. I'm their mother. The system always favors the mother." David chuckled softly, a sound that made Victoria shudder. "Victoria, do you really think a man who built an empire from scratch wouldn't know how to plan his own revenge? Every word you just said was recorded. And tomorrow at 9 a.m., you'll find out exactly what 18 months of meticulous planning can do." For the first time, Victoria realized that she had completely underestimated the man she had thought was destroyed by grief. What she couldn't have imagined was that every lie he had told, every tear he had shed at the cemetery, every sleepless night, had fueled not only his grief but his silent determination to uncover the truth and see justice done. What that arrogant woman was about to discover was that turning a loving father into an enemy is the biggest mistake anyone can make. The next morning, David was sitting in the office of Marcus Chun, Chicago's most feared criminal lawyer. Chun had built his reputation by destroying powerful people who thought they were above the law, exactly the kind of expertise David needed. 18 months of pretending your daughters were dead," Chun murmured, leafing through the stacks of evidence David had compiled. "This goes beyond document fraud. We're talking extortion, parental kidnapping, corruption of a public official." "How long would she get?" David asked, looking at the photographs of the bank transfers scattered across the table. 15 to 25 years, easily. Especially with these recordings of Officer Harrison." Chun smiled coldly. "But I assume you want more than just to send her to prison." David nodded. "I want her to lose everything. Credibility, money, freedom, dignity. I want her to understand exactly what it means to be destroyed by someone she underestimated." While Chin organized the legal strategy, David received a message from Victoria that almost made him laugh out loud. "David, I know you're upset, but we can work this out like adults. How about dinner tonight? We can discuss an agreement about visitation with the girls. It doesn't have to be complicated." The arrogance was staggering. Even after being confronted with irrefutable evidence of her crimes, Victoria still believed she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. She really thought that 18 months of pretending her daughters were dead was something that could be resolved with a civilized dinner. David replied, "Sure, Victoria. Let's have dinner. You choose the restaurant." What she didn't know was that David had spent the last 2 months not only gathering evidence, but carefully orchestrating every step of his ex-wife's complete destruction. The private investigation had revealed much more than document fraud. Thomas Rodriguez, his private investigator, had discovered that Victoria had used the alimony money not only to bribe officials, but also to sustain a lifestyle completely different from the one she pretended to have. A luxurious apartment in someone else's name, imported cars, trips to the Caribbean, all meticulously documented. This woman is a manual on how not to commit financial crimes, Rodriguez had joked in his latest report. She left digital traces on absolutely everything. But David was saving his trump card for the perfect moment. For months, Victoria had been posting on social media about her new life, photos at expensive restaurants, spas, resorts, always tagging her location. What she didn't realize was that the dates of her posts coincided exactly with the alimony deposits. Chin interrupted his thoughts. "David, I need to ask you an important question. Are you sure you want to go down this path? Once we start, there's no turning back. She will be completely destroyed." David thought about 18 months of visiting empty graves. About hundreds of thousands of dollars paid in alimony to sustain the charade. Of his daughters being taught to believe that their father had abandoned them. Of Victoria posting happy photos in Paris while he cried at the cemetery. "She chose to play with a father's love for his daughters," David replied. "Now she'll learn that some things are too sacred to be used as bargaining chips." Chin smiled, opening his laptop. "Then let's get started. The criminal complaint will be filed tomorrow at 9 a.m. The FBI investigation into police corruption will be launched at 9:15 a.m. And at 9:30 a.m., when she's being arrested, her social media will become public evidence of how she spent every penny she stole from you." David looked out the office window, watching the city move below. Victoria had completely underestimated his ability to uncover the truth. But what she was about to discover was that a man who builds empires not only knows how to find answers, he knows how to turn every answer into a devastatingly accurate weapon. That evening, as he prepared for the civilized dinner Victoria had suggested, David received one last update from Rodriguez. "The cameras are in place, the microphones tested, and we have immunity agreement with Officer Harrison in exchange for his full testimony. She has no idea what's about to happen." What Victoria would discover in a few hours was that this dinner would not be a negotiation. It would be her last meal as a free woman, because David had turned every lie told, every dollar stolen, and every tear shed into a symphony of justice that would echo far beyond that restaurant table. The Meridian restaurant was the kind of place Victoria loved to frequent during her golden years of inflated alimony. Elegant surroundings, expensive dishes, clientele who didn't question where the money to sustain that lifestyle came from. She arrived punctually at 7:30 p.m., wearing a blazer that had cost $3,000, coincidentally, the exact amount of one of David's alimony deposits. David was already waiting for her at a discreet table in the corner, seemingly relaxed, leafing through the menu. Victoria smiled confidently as she approached, still believing she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. "David, I'm so glad you came," she said, sitting down gracefully. "I knew we would be able to resolve this like mature adults." "Of course, Victoria. We'll settle everything today." David closed the menu, his eyes fixed on her. "By the way, how are Emma and Sophie? Are they adjusting well to the life you've created for them?" Victoria hesitated for a moment. "They're fine. Happy. Far from complications." "Complications," David repeated, savoring the word. "That's an interesting way to refer to your own father." He took his cell phone out of his pocket. "How about we hear what your daughters really think about these complications?" He pressed play. Emma's voice, recorded discreetly during a conversation with Destiny, echoed softly, "I dream about my dad sometimes. I wonder if he's okay. Mom said he didn't want us anymore, but I remember him taking me to the park." Victoria paled. "You recorded my daughters?" "Our daughters," David corrected coldly. "And I don't need to record anything when they talk spontaneously about the father they believe they've lost." He paused the recording. "But since we're talking about recordings..." David placed a small tape recorder on the table. Victoria watched the device with growing apprehension. "Remember Officer Harrison, Victoria? The one you paid generously to falsify official documents." David pressed play again. The corrupt police officer's voice filled the space between them. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand your situation. $50,000 for the accident documents, plus $20,000 a month to keep the story consistent. In return, your ex-husband will never question the official reports." Victoria's voice replied clearly, "Perfect. David is too emotional when it comes to the girls." He'll be too busy crying to investigate anything. Victoria tried to grab the recorder, but David was faster. This was recorded illegally. It's not valid as evidence. Maybe not, David smiled. But Harrison has already confessed everything to the FBI in exchange for immunity. He handed over every forged document, every bank transfer, every conversation you had. David took a leather folder from the chair beside him, including this. He spread photographs of bank statements across the table showing child support payments going directly to offshore accounts, then being redistributed to finance luxury travel, expensive apartments, and a lifestyle that cost more than $30,000 a month. You received $270,000 in alimony over the last 18 months, David said methodically. Money intended for the care of children I believed to be dead. Meanwhile, my daughters lived in a lower middle-class home, wearing cheap clothes, while you posted photos in Paris. Victoria looked at the scattered evidence, her confidence rapidly evaporating. David, you don't understand. I needed the money to keep the girls hidden, to protect them. Protect them. David laughed bitterly. Let's see some of your protections. He took out his cell phone and began showing screenshots from Victoria's social media accounts. Photos at expensive spas, luxury restaurants, exclusive resorts, all dated and geotagged, many coinciding exactly with the dates of the alimony deposits. This photo in Cancun was taken 3 days after you received $15,000 in child support. This $800 dinner at Le Bernardin was paid for on the same day I received your report on the girls' medical expenses. Victoria tried one last desperate gambit. Even if you prove all of this, you'll never be able to take my daughters away from me completely. I'm still their biological mother. David leaned forward, his eyes flashing with an intensity that made Victoria instinctively recoil. Victoria, do you really think a man who uncovered your elaborate deception in just 2 months of investigation wouldn't have thought of that? He took a series of official documents out of his briefcase. While you thought you were safe, Chen and Associates, the most feared criminal law firm in the country, has already filed charges of document fraud, parental abduction, extortion, and corruption of a public official. The FBI has a full investigation on you and Harrison. And tomorrow at 9 a.m., when the arrest warrants are executed, you'll find out that underestimating a father is the most expensive mistake anyone can make. Victoria looked at the documents with growing horror. You can't do this. I'm the mother of your daughters. You ceased to be their mother the moment you decided to fake their deaths to steal money from me, David replied emotionlessly. Now you're just a criminal who used innocent children as tools for financial fraud. Chen appeared at the restaurant entrance, accompanied by 2 FBI agents. Victoria followed David's gaze and saw the men approaching. David, please, she whispered, real panic finally replacing her arrogance. We can make a deal. I'll return the money, you keep the girls, no one else needs to know. Everyone already knows, Victoria. David showed her the screen of his cell phone. Your arrest will be broadcast live on 3 different news networks. Every person you deceived, every friend you lied to about the tragedy of my daughter's death, will see exactly who you really are. The agents arrived at the table. Victoria Thompson, you are under arrest for document fraud, parental kidnapping, and conspiracy to corrupt a public official. As the handcuffs were placed on her wrists, Victoria looked at David one last time. I did it for love. To protect the girls. David stood up, calmly adjusting his jacket. You did it out of greed. The difference is that love builds families, greed destroys them. And you've just discovered that destroying the wrong family has consequences far beyond what your limited imagination could have predicted. As Victoria was led away under the curious glances of the other customers, David remained at the table for a few more minutes, quietly finishing his wine. In a few hours, he would pick up his daughters at home and officially begin to rebuild the family that Victoria had tried to destroy. But something still lingered in the air, a question that would only be answered when Emma and Sophie discovered the whole truth about the 18 months they believed they had been abandoned by the father who never stopped looking for them. 6 months after Victoria Thompson's arrest, David sat in the backyard of his renovated mansion, watching Emma and Sophie play in the pool with their new friends from the private school where they had been enrolled. The children's laughter echoed through the space, a sound he had dreamed of hearing again during 18 months of fabricated mourning. The process of rebuilding the family had been intense but rewarding. The first few weeks had been the most difficult. Emma and Sophie needed therapy to process the discovery that they had been used as pawns in a cruel game of financial manipulation. Child psychologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell had explained that children in this situation often blame themselves for their parents' separation, but with time and patience, the girls began to understand that they were victims, not guilty. "Daddy, look how I swim now!" Sophie shouted, executing a perfect dive that would have made any instructor proud. David smiled, remembering how, just a few months ago, Sophie had been afraid of deep water. Victoria had created so many unnecessary fears in the girls during those 18 months of isolation that part of their recovery included rediscovering the courage and confidence that every child should have. The Victoria Thompson case had become a national sensation. CNN, Fox News, NBC, all covered extensively the story of the mother who faked her own daughter's deaths to extort child support. The district attorney used the case as an example of how crimes against the family would be prosecuted with the utmost severity. Victoria received 22 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the next 15 years. Document fraud, parental kidnapping, extortion, corruption of a public official. Each charge resulted in consecutive sentences that ensured she would spend most of her remaining adult life behind bars. But legal justice was only the beginning. The story leaked to social media when Chen and associates publicly released the evidence in the case. Photos of Victoria at luxury resorts, dated and geotagged to coincide exactly with the child support payments, went viral. Hashtag Victoria Thompson scam became a trending topic for weeks. Her former friends abandoned her when they discovered they had been unwitting accomplices to lies about grief and tragedy. The elite social circle she valued so highly expelled her completely. No one wanted association with a woman who had used the death of children to defraud money. Corrupt officer Mike Harrison also received 12 years and lost his police pension. During his testimony, he revealed that Victoria had boasted that David was too emotional to question anything, a statement that became emblematic of how she had completely underestimated the man she had targeted. David, for his part, turned the experience into fuel for exponential growth. Thompson Real Estate Holdings, which had stagnated during his 18 months of mourning, now thrived under his renewed leadership. He diversified into family property development, created the Emma and Sophie Foundation for children who are victims of parental alienation, and became a sought-after speaker on fraud detection and family protection. His personal story, when shared at business conferences, resonated deeply with other executives who had faced personal betrayals. "The best revenge," he always said, "is not just surviving betrayal, but building something greater than your enemies ever imagined possible." His media appearances brought in multi-million-dollar contracts. Companies wanted to associate themselves with someone who had demonstrated resilience, strategic intelligence, and moral integrity under extreme pressure. Within 6 months, David's net worth had tripled. Emma and Sophie also flourished. Emma discovered a natural talent for horseback riding and was competing in junior tournaments. Sophie showed exceptional aptitude for math and science, participating in programs for gifted children. Both spoke openly in their therapy sessions about how lucky they felt to have a father who fought so hard to find them. Destiny Williams, the courageous girl who had changed everything by approaching David at the cemetery, became an extended part of the family. David paid for her full education at an elite private school and established a trust fund for her college. "Heroes come in all sizes," he always said when asked about Destiny. "Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths." The most satisfying aspect of David's revenge was not Victoria's imprisonment or financial ruin. It was seeing his daughters thrive in an environment where they were loved unconditionally. Every academic achievement, every spontaneous laugh, every moment of genuine happiness represented a victory over the 18 months of manipulation Victoria had imposed. During an interview on 60 Minutes, the reporter asked if David ever felt remorse for the severity of the consequences Victoria faced. His response went viral. Remorse would be appropriate if she were a mother who made an error in judgment. But a person who uses the alleged death of children as a financial tool is not a mother. She is a predator who chose the wrong target. The business community took note. Harvard Business School invited David to teach a class on strategic response to personal crisis. His method of combining meticulous investigation, strategic patience, and devastatingly precise execution became a case study at several business schools. Victoria, meanwhile, discovered that federal prison does not offer the same luxuries as her favorite resorts. Reports from former cellmates indicated that she often cried about having lost everything to greed, but rarely expressed genuine remorse for the daughters she had traumatized. Even in prison, Her primary concern seemed to be her own situation, not the damage she had caused. 2 years after the initial discovery in the cemetery, David received a letter from prison. Victoria, finally understanding the magnitude of her destruction, begged for any chance to see her daughters. She had lost not only her freedom and money, but also any possibility of a future relationship with Emma and Sophie. David showed the letter to Dr. Mitchell, who recommended waiting until the girls were older to decide on any contact. They need to feel completely secure in their new lives before facing the complexity of forgiving or not forgiving the mother who betrayed them, she explained. The night before the 3rd anniversary of her official death, Emma asked a question that surprised David. "Dad, do you think Mom really loved us, or were we just money to her?" It was a devastatingly mature question for a 10-year-old. David chose honesty. "I believe she loved you the way she could, but she allowed greed to become more important than that love. Sometimes people make choices that destroy the most precious things they have." Sophie, always the most pragmatic, replied, "At least now we know you never abandoned us. That's more important." Those words crystallized David's true victory. It wasn't about destroying Victoria or proving his superior intelligence. It was about ensuring that his daughters grew up knowing they were truly loved and valued, not as financial instruments, but as precious individuals whose well-being was worth any sacrifice. The lesson David shared with other parents facing similar betrayals was simple but powerful. Never underestimate the lengths a true parent will go to protect their children. And more importantly, never turn children into weapons, because you may find yourself declaring war on someone far more determined and intelligent than you realize. The empire David built on the ashes of his apparent devastation became a testament to the fact that sometimes our greatest betrayals lead us to our greatest victories, as long as we have courage, intelligence, and above all, genuine love worth fighting for. 3 years later, as he watched Emma and Sophie graduate as the top students in their class, David smiled, remembering the words Victoria had said so arrogantly, "David is too emotional to question anything." She was right about him being emotional, but she had completely confused emotion with weakness. A father's love for his daughters did not make him vulnerable, it made him unstoppable. And that was the difference between building a family and trying to destroy it out of greed. If you faced betrayals that seemed impossible to overcome, or know someone fighting seemingly insurmountable injustices, share this story. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that intelligence, patience, and determination can turn our greatest defeats into our most satisfying victories. Because sometimes, underestimating the wrong person is the biggest mistake anyone can make.